It's just feels wonderful to be here and speak to all of you. I must confess that, we just talked about the jigsaw puzzle, and we in India Skills are very much part of that jigsaw puzzle. And we're all trying to figure out, where we're going to be, where we're going to go, and when the inflection point is going to come. Mr. Kalra talked about private certification coming in that could help. Mr. Amalan, very passionate about NCVT, which is big, huge, and said that NCVT is the way to go. I personally think that we need both. We need private certifiers, we need the government. Each one has a role to play going forward. A quick minute on India Skills, because that's not what I'm going to spend too much time on, because that information may be available to you. India Skills is a joint venture company between Manipal Education, which is India's largest player in the private education space, and City and Guilds. City and Guilds is one very large player, very large international player in vocational training. They're basically 130 years old, and over this period of time have built close to 600 plus qualifications of what we call courses. They're present in close to 80 countries, have 6,000 plus centers, and every year certify close to 2 million students across the globe. So they're a very large player in the training industry. So this is a joint venture, a 51-49 joint venture which has been set up in the form of India Skills. India Skills just turned 1 last week, so we are a year old, and over this period of time we've tried to do a few things which I'll talk about over the few slides that I have now. What I'm going to spend a little time on is this whole vocational training industry, and what we as a training provider and part of the industry see this industry as, and what we think we need and what we think the industry needs to make this whole business work, right? So Abhinav had this wonderful slide saying, why isn't any number there not anywhere close to a 400 crore business that NIIT is built? And he's absolutely right. Over a period of time, there's not a single company that is outside IT that has come and set itself up, which is built anything sizable from a training, from a vocational training perspective. We think that inflection point is there, but we don't know where it is, right? It's like the blind man and the elephant. So everybody's trying to feel this, big piece, trying to figure out, what this whole business is all about. Huge supply side, massive demand side. So you go plonk yourself in the middle. Looks like a very obvious business, but it's just not there. Nobody has actually achieved scale. Nobody has achieved any form of, of a business, over the last many years. Okay, I'll quickly run through this slide. All of us keep talking about any business has a supply side to it and has a demand side. So I'll start with the supply side. Supply side is all about the student or the learner input that comes into the system, right? So we all talk about this huge unemployment, underemployment. India is a young country, a billion, population, 70% of them being youth, the demographic dividend, etc., etc. So it's all there. So we keep talking about, over these years, in any forum you go, people talk about this huge problem of underemployment, unemployment. There's one data missing there. There are 7.6 million students who drop out of the education system between standard 1 to standard 10 every year. 7.6 million students drop out. That's another data that you can just add to that whole supply side. Some facts about how India compares with other countries, in terms of a young India, how we'll compare ourselves to Europe, China, etc. going forward. Again, something that we all know. The demand side, which I've not talked about, 500 million people in the workforce, between 15 and 20 million people being added to the workforce every year, and that's the segment we're looking at. 20 million are getting added to the workforce every year, and those are the people who need to get skilled. That's the demand side, right? So all along we say huge supply, huge demand, go plonk yourself in the middle. You can't do that because there's a skills gap. The people who are there from the supply side don't have the relevant skills to join demand. I think it's time has come to, stop talking about these large numbers and really getting there and start acting, right? Figuring out how are we going to really do this. Quickly, this business essentially has 5 stakeholders in this entire business, right? The one in the middle is the one that plays a key role, and what we call them awarding bodies, or we call them certifying bodies. Today, the biggest awarding or the certifying body in India is NCVT, and that's a fact. I mean, that's the organization that Amalan is part of. NCVT is the largest certifying body. We have industry, we have students, of course, we have policymakers, which is the government, and we have delivery partners or delivery centers, which could be franchised, it could be owned, it could be whatever. So these are the 5 stakeholders, and everything that you see against the box are benefits that each stakeholder gets. Very simple. What does the industry get? Industry gets ready workforce, right? In this whole business, they get people who are ready to work, what we call first day, first hour productive workforce. It's a term that we've coined and tried to use and live up to. What does the government get out of this? Higher employment, hopefully more taxes because of larger employment, but meets their agenda of employing more people, meets the agenda of reaping the demographic dividend as we go along, right? That's what the policymaker gets. What does the learner get at the end of the day? A great job, right? These are all underemployed, unemployed people. They get good jobs, right? They get, they are in society with a good job, and don't kind of tend to get lost. And finally, delivery centers. What do they get? Delivery center is very simple. It's a way to make more money, right? A person will become a delivery center as long as he sees a good return on the investment that he'll make to become a delivery partner. It also allows him to kind of expand his current portfolio. If he's currently running an IT training center, then you can add 5 more courses and then you kind of expand your portfolio. This is what really the stakeholders benefit. What I really want to quickly cover in the next few minutes is, what is it that we really need from each of these stakeholders to make this business reach that inflection point quickly, right? And that's really what's really important to us. The awarding body or the certifying body, the way it's known world over, right? Or the way, what NCVT is really trying to do or has positioned itself to do. What does City and Guilds do? What does EdXL do? What does TAFE do? These are large, very large certifying awarding bodies in the vocational space world over. They essentially build industry relevant qualifications. The first thing they do is build courses, right? What are called qualifications. Create a pool of faculty and enable that. Actually, you don't go and kind of hire them and put them on your roles, because that's done by the delivery center, but you go and create a pool of faculty and you enable that process. You create support material for learning. While you build qualifications is what we call a basic structure of the curriculum, right? That's what the MES product does. What does MES do? It gives you a structure of the curriculum. But when you go and teach, you need what is called courseware. You need student guides, you need faculty guides, you need presentations, PPTs. That's what we call courseware. So awarding bodies or certifying bodies go and build this courseware to help and enable training. Very important, they build very strong assessment tools. And in vocational training, assessment is a very, very key thing. And why is it key? We just heard Amalan talking about how useless knowledge is and why skills are required. Well, I think it's a combination of both. You need some amount of knowledge, but in vocational training, you need a lot of skills, right? The art of assessing skill is something that India doesn't have today. And India has never had the science of how do you assess a skill. Let me give you an example. When you're training somebody to, say, build a wall, right? You're training a mason, and a mason is going through this whole process of building a wall. How do you assess that mason's competency at the end of the course? Well, it's not about that person coming and writing a theory exam of 10 questions and getting 7 right and then getting 70% marks. It's not about writing a theory exam. It's about writing a theory exam and also assessing his competency. So what are you doing? You're actually observing this person while he's building the wall and making a few judgments on the fact that has he built that competency to build a wall in such a way that it doesn't collapse on us, right? So that is called competency-based assessments, and this assessment process has not been there in this country, and there are organizations like City and Guilds, like TAFE, like EdXL, who over these many years have mastered this art of competency-based assessments, which is basically assessing a practical skill. We need to build very strong credit transfer mechanisms, which is the other thing that, that an awarding body should actually, constantly keep doing. Why? In India is a very degree-based economy, right? What would you do? The first thing you want to do is get a BA degree or get a BCom degree. That's if you're not part of ISB, and that if you're not part of the good formal education. So you want to go and do a BA. Why do you want to go do a BA? Because fundamentally you can't even get married if you don't have a degree, right? Your social status is all defined by the fact that you first need a degree. So you would, if you had 5,000 rupees to spare, you'll do a BA and not do a course in retail, which will get you a job quickly, right? There must be a way to connect vocational training to a degree. And this whole process of credit transfer, IGNOU has done it in a very, very nice way. It's a good beginning through their community colleges initiative. I don't know how many of you all know this. They've started this whole community college initiative, and there is a process by which you can actually go and join a course there and then subsequently do a distance education program and get yourself a degree too. And finally, what you need is a certification. So what does the awarding body finally do? They give you a certificate, or that certification, which is valuable because at the end of it, you get a job. That's an awarding body. Very quickly, what do you need from industry? Industry is a very, very key stakeholder. So when Amalan asked me, where does Dilip belong? I think he belongs to the private sector. Because we're hoping, and I'm sure he will, that he will bring industry to the table. It's a big player in this whole jigsaw puzzle. Okay, what does industry essentially do? They give you placement, right? That this whole business is about creating jobs. This business is not about training. Training enables jobs, right? So when you go and get a learner to a classroom, finally you're telling that person, listen, at the end of this you're going to get a job. So it's about employment and not about employability. I think if we don't internalize this ourselves, I think we'll get lost on the way. So it's all about employment and not employability, and employment happens when you create jobs. So that's what industry does, simple. Today what's happening in industry, it's very interesting. If you look at the retail industry, and that's one of the courses that we are doing a reasonably good job, and we've launched it. It's the first qualification. In the bottom of the pyramid segment in industry today, trespassers are hired. If you go to any retail store, there's a board that says, "Come in, I need people badly, I will hire you," right? So we have this job fair model. Let me give you a small example of the way we acquire students, right, in our whole B2C model. So we do things like job fairs. And what is a job fair? We go and put a small little classified ad, and we tell people that come here and we'll give you a job. Of course, we also say that, you'll have to get yourself trained and stuff like that, and, try and, not camouflage it, but try and show the job up front there. So we have Reliance Retail, we have Madura Garments, and all the logos nicely flashed there, and finally show people a job. So when these people come in, we have the employer sitting on the panel. Okay? Typically in a job fair, in a place in Bangalore called Hebbal, where we have a station, where we have a center. We have a center, or say Masap Tank. We have a center in Hyderabad in Masap Tank. So we'll do a job fair in Masap Tank. We'll typically get about 200 people walking into a center. Capacity of that center is about 20 or 30. It'll have one classroom. 200 people walk in. Great joy. Everybody is like damn thrilled. 200 people come in, then you talk to them, they meet the employer counsels them. At the end of it, the employer actually ends up selecting about 10 of them, whom the employer finds fit, right? And they'll say, these 10 people are good, I can actually even employ them. Then about 30-40 of them, the employer will say, these are what are called trainable rejects. Okay, there's a metric that we've developed. We've got a company called Meritrack, which is a very good company in assessment. So they help us actually build some metrics like this. So 50% of them, so if 200 come, about 15-20 the retailer says I can even employ them. But if you want, polish them a bit, give them a soft skills course and stuff like that and push them in. About 50% of them, which will be about 100 of them, they'll say these are trainable rejects. So you can actually train them. So the industry will actually give them a letter and stuff like that saying come. And then when you go back to those 100 people and say, now the course costs 6,000, 7,000, 8,000, out of those 100 people, two of them come and register. You're lucky if you get 5, right? Because all of them think that they can actually go directly and get the job. Why should I pay 5,000 rupees? I can actually walk into that company and get a job. You know what that company does one day later? Calls my salesperson and says, listen, can I just get that phone numbers of that balance 100? So we said, why? She said, no, I think I can call them and see if they're not joining you, I'll hire them. Dilip, this is the situation day on day. We do this across the country. We currently have close to about 42, 43 centers across the country and growing rapidly. At the end of this quarter will be 75. At the end of the year will be 109 centers across the country. And none of the centers, each will have typically a capacity of about 30, 40 students that they can get. None of them are running anything more than 30, 40% of capacity. Right? So there's huge capacity built and huge capacity being built as we go along. But classrooms are empty. And this is what's happening actually. Because the employer is willing to hire them without training. Because the employers, I don't blame them. Because there is no supply chain built to the employer as yet. How can the employer shut his business waiting for India Skills to deliver? No way. So the problem is that this inflection point will come when, the third point that I'm saying, when industry starts mandating certification. I'll give you a quick another example. I think it was Abhinav who talked about UK and plumbing and all that. I was in the London Underground because we are doing a few large projects with the metros in the country today. We've actually signed up, with one of the largest metros to do some certification programs on construction and construction safety. So, I was called to the London Underground, which is the oldest, underground, to see what they do in training. At the London Underground, you cannot work there till you are insured. You cannot get an insurance policy till you have a City and Guild certification. I keep talking about this example of this PUC certificate. This pollution control certificate? One way to have done it by the government should have said, we want to make this country very pollution free and, so we need your support. So please try and get all your cars certified. Do you think anybody will go and get it certified? The day it got linked to getting your RC book, it's done. Right? So the industry really needs to work closely with us to start mandating certification, and you can't do it at 100% because their business will stop. So do it slowly, do it bit by bit. Great initiative by Dilip and team to start forming sector councils, which is the other point we're talking about. Sector skills councils are nothing but when industry stalwarts get together in a particular sector, form a council, and that council starts deciding that our sector now will focus on skills and will try and employ as many people with skills and certified skills. So who will certify them? They will empanel a set of certification partners. They will say this is the standard. They will say this is the way to go. I think that will change this business. The inflection point will come when that sector council across 20, 30 sectors starts delivering. I think there's one in auto. Great news, Dilip gave me this morning that this retail one is getting set up. And they need to really get tough about it. If they don't get tough about it, and things are not going to work. And that's the other thing that we expect government to do, from a mandating perspective. So industry, and when I say deep engagement, industry really needs to engage very deeply with vocational partners in terms of helping them build curriculum, telling them when they need people, where they need people. Because what happens is when you produce people and you go back to the industry, he says, oh, this month I don't want people. So if he's able to give you a month-wise, region-wise forecast, you're able to plan your output better. Government, very simple. I was just talking about what the government benefits. But what we really need from the government is one very, very important thing. Vocational education today doesn't have the legitimacy, right? Today, people take up to vocational education by force and not by choice. This is a favorite subject of mine which I go and speak everywhere. You're pushed into vocational training, right? If you joined an ITI, you knew that you were a loser. So if that's the status that vocational education has in the country, it will never succeed. Because it doesn't have the legitimacy. The only body in this country that can make that work is the government. Through announcing schemes, talking good things about what it means to get certified, advertising, channelizing funds, the voucher system, build a set of vouchers. Today, 18 government departments independently fund vocational training, and except people like us who are hungry and desperate for business, nobody knows. Who knows? Does a learner know that he can approach a government department and get funding? No. That's because the government is not doing enough to talk about the fact that we'll fund you, we'll take care of jobs, we will certify, we'll talk to industry, etc., etc., etc. And that's really something that one is hoping that NSDC and, and organizations like this will start doing. And I also think that they should channelize everything to NSDC. All the 18 government departments should work through one agency. So it becomes easier for partners like us and for industry. So the government has a big role to play in basically legitimizing this whole business of vocational. Quickly, delivery centers, what do they need to do? They need to deliver quality, they need to have quality standards, have great faculty. Simple, they'll do all that provided they see money. Moment they run a batch of 5 people in their center, they bleed. Right? If they bleed, they won't be in business. So a delivery center really needs to see money. This is the only motivation actually, to actually go and start, pushing business. Other enablers are funding agencies. You have banks, you have microfinance companies, you have NGOs, you have a whole lot of such people who can actually come and enable this whole process. And finally, there's the student. We know what the student benefits, right? Student benefits in terms of getting a good job. So he gets a good livelihood, he gets some status in society and stuff like that. Yeah, I'm done. This is the last slide. The key thing that we need a student to do is to come and complete the course, right? Most students drop out halfway, especially when it's free and funded, right? So that's all we need from them. And so finally what happens if all these things happen, all these policy makers work together, we have a nice smiling vocational training system. Thank you.